Okay. I guess recording in progress means I'm supposed to say something clever. When I don't really have anything clever to say, I usually resort to some kind of video or some kind of image, which is what I'm doing right now. So this means I don't really have anything clever to say. This is where we're at in terms of the that's good, yeah. In the feed, you can't see that I made the screen here full screen, but I don't know how to do anything about that. But anyway, we're in Genesis chapter 13 now. We just finished chapter 12. Genesis is one of the most chronologically orderly books in the whole Bible. First Samuel is like that. I guess Exodus is like that. But it's very orderly. It proceeds from one point in time and it proceeds all the way through to another point. And the point that it starts from is the beginning of time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the point it ends at is, ironically, the entire family of Israel, Abraham's grandson, so the 12 tribes, as slaves in Egypt. That's the destination point for the book of Genesis, which is a setup. So that's anticipation. The book of Genesis ends in anticipation of the fulfillment of the covenant that God's going to make in chapter 15, in a couple chapters, where he's promised to give the land of Canaan, where Abraham is at the moment when the covenant is made, to his descendants, who will be, which you don't know yet in Genesis 15, is going to be Jacob / Israel. But what you also don't know is it's a roundabout trip to take possession of the land, because they're going to start in Canaan here. It's literally a roundabout. They're going to start here in Canaan. Can you see my mouse? You can't see my mouse. Yeah, Canaan, Genesis 47, but right now, really, the move from Haran at the top. Then you have everything from 12 on till about 47 takes place in either Canaan or Egypt, but Canaan, that's where the family is. And that's the promised land. But to get there, they're going to have to go over to Egypt, spend 430 years as slaves, and then literally make the circuitous roundabout trip back into Canaan from the east over the Jordan under Joshua, which will finally happen somewhere around the 1400s. So with Abraham, we're up in 2100 or something BC. And then somewhere around 1400 BC is when the conquest, they finally get back to Canaan. So God is never in a hurry on this stuff. It's just the centuries continue to unfold and the progress happens. And what we get is a nice written, concise, we can call it a summary, but it's a divinely inspired summary. So it's the summary that has a divine narrative in it, the divine part of the narrative. Yeah.
You're in Genesis 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where the nation of Israel starts. One person.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It depends on what you consider the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
Because Jacob is going to be renamed Israel.
Yeah.
That's when I think, okay, we have a nation. Because he renames Jacob to Israel.
Well,
what Abraham
is. The reason I say that is because he starts out, go forth from your country. Go do this. One person. And he says, I will number you as the sands of the sea and as the stars of the sky. And from that one person comes a mighty nation. Now, how did they get there? They got there through slavery.
Yes.
That's how they grew. That's how they became this mighty nation that could later rise up against the people of Canaan and overtake them.
Yeah, when we get done with this, we're probably just going to move right into that story in Exodus. In the meantime, Robert, I hit end of slideshow and nothing happens. So I don't know how to get rid of the slideshow other than to hit this X. Sure. Okay. That's weird. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Brian. Yeah, it's a saga. It's a human saga.
Yeah.
Of the passage of time, where you have these individual stories that the author tells, and what you have to do is piece the stories together and try to pull out of it the divine story. What God, because God is always doing something, and in this case, he's calling, let's summarize it this way, he's calling a people to himself. And so when he calls Abraham, then Abram, when he calls right here, this man, out of Haran, to go to Canaan, he is now in the process of creating out of nothing a people of God who are as yet non-existent. And so he will make a devout worshiper of God, the creator, out of this man Abram, whose family was a family of idolaters when they left Chaldea, whenever they left Chaldea. That's how God works. He starts with nothing. He doesn't start with, I'm going to go find the best person I can. Okay, where's the best person? Oh, I don't have a best person. Well, this guy I'll have to do. He doesn't work like that ever. That's why he often chooses the younger son, Jacob, as an example. David as an example. You know, he chooses the younger son. And it's ironically in the case of Jesus, he was the first one, but of course, yeah, that's how it, or the son of a woman who couldn't have kids. So you can see the hand of God in it, like with Hannah, the mother of Samuel, or the nameless wife of Manoah, the father of Samson, was the same way. So yeah, the divine hand in these stories. And so we have the promise. He comes down to Canaan, like he's told. And then he promptly continues right on out the south side and he heads to Egypt, where, in my opinion, he doesn't plan on leaving. So he's embarrassed by the Pharaoh because he basically invites his wife, why don't you just go participate in his harem so I'll be okay. We'll tell him you're my sister. Pharaoh figures it out, probably by the hand of God. And Pharaoh chases him back to Egypt, or back to Canaan, where he belongs. So that's how I read the divine narrative. The story is just Abraham going to Egypt, running into trouble with the Pharaoh, and then leaving Egypt and heading back to Canaan. The divine narrative, you ask, how is this story a part of, at the grandest sense, the history of redemption? But how does this story fit into this promise that he's going to give the land to Canaan? You know,
this all depends upon one person. And that person isn't Abraham, it's God.
you can just assume that the personalities are somewhat clueless.
Yeah.
They're simply there. They're there. No, it's okay. They're there, fulfilling, taking their place in the plan of God and the activities of God without their consent or knowledge. That's how I read these people.
Without their cooperation.
With the cooperation, yeah. Like in my opinion, this one, when he went to Egypt, that's a threat to the covenant promise. What will be a covenant promise that he's going to get the land. So something's got to happen. He's got to get back to Canaan. How is he going to end up back in Canaan? Answer: he's going to get kicked. The great patriarch is going to get embarrassed by the Pharaoh and appear in an unflattering light versus the Pharaoh, remembering that the man who's writing was the guy who basically defeated the Pharaoh to get the Israelites out of Egypt just before he wrote this. So it's not like he has this biased, positive, opinion of Egypt. He got chased out of Egypt by the Egyptians, and that's why he went to Moses. That's why he went to Midian. He fled Egypt, and then he went back and kind of got rejected by everyone, and he had to go back because of God. But that's the story of I said this last week. It's an interesting interplay between Egypt and Israel throughout the Bible. Egypt keeps reappearing, and you would think that they would reappear in a negative light because of they were the source of the slavery, but it doesn't really happen. Even in the New Testament, Joseph will flee to Egypt for safety. Just, I'm trying to think who else. Well, actually, kind of like Abraham did, because he fled because of a famine. But Joseph will take Mary and they will go to Egypt. That's Matthew. So they go to Egypt for safety. And then he returns to Judea, Galilee, when the time was right. But Egypt has this interesting place in the history of redemption. And I also mentioned last week that it continues on to this day. Egypt and Israel have an interesting relationship. Remember, that was the first Arab nation to make peace with Israel in 1980. Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, was it Sadat? Signed a peace treaty, sort of under the the agency of Jimmy Carter, for which I think all three of them won the Nobel Peace Prize. But that was the first time that was that Anwar Sadat? Yes, and then he got assassinated. He made the peace treaty and he paid for it with his life, and he got assassinated. But it was Egypt that was the first Arab nation to make peace with Israel, and they've had this cooperation ever since. And I said last week that they were the ones who warned the Israelis about the pending Hamas attack on October 7, 2023. That was the Egyptians. Okay, a little bit off subject, but that's okay. Putting the pieces together, I think, is valuable. So here we are in we've finished with chapter 12, with this story that results in Abraham wronging the Pharaoh chastising him and sending him back a rich man to Canaan, because he's going to give him all kinds of possessions. So he's going to take Sarai, who will be the grandmother of Jacob / Israel, back to Canaan where they belong. Verse 20, Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away, away with his wife and all that belonged to him. Won't be the last time that happens either. All right, let me turn the page, subject change. Enter Lot. When you read a story like that, you have to think, what is this story doing here? How does this fit into the divine narrative? Why does the author care about, who plays no part? Lot does, this man Lot, who we'll see in a minute, in the history of redemption. It's not like he's a fundamentally important character in the history of redemption. He is forgotten, I believe, after chapter 19. He disappears from the narrative of the Bible, except for Hebrews, a mention in Hebrews about his time in Sodom. But other than that, he doesn't play any role at all for the rest of the Old Testament. But he's important for some reason. So our job is to try.
In the way he does, because one of his daughters becomes a nation, the child becomes a nation, so the Moabites.
Yeah. Actually, both of them. Who's the other?
The other one became, I can't think of.
Yeah. They're gonna,
They become the family itself. So even though Lot's not mentioned, the family's still an important part of Israel.
They'll do that a lot too, where, there's these nations that Israel's going to grapple with and fight with over the course of the centuries. And you'll get the origin story for those nations, and how, in a sense, oftentimes, like with Canaan, because of Ham's sin against Noah, Ham was Noah's son, so Canaan reaped the consequences of Ham's wronging of Noah, because God cursed Ammonites, Canaan. He cursed Canaan. That explains why Israel was given the land. And so you'll see these origin stories for these different peoples, because they're going to pop up in the Bible. The Ammonites and the Moabites are both going to pop up. In fact, David will have Moabite blood. David's, whatever you want to, what would that be? Great grandmother? Yeah, great grandmother, whatever, was a Moabitess. That's the way you say it. And so David had Moabite blood, which he will take advantage of during the story. So it pays to know something about that, then you understand why this stuff is in here. All right. So let's learn what happens once he gets back into where he belonged, which is Canaan. Remind ourselves of where Canaan is. This is Canaan right here. So here's Egypt. Here's Canaan. Abraham went down to the Negev, which is the south country. That's all it means. Proceeded right on down into Egypt. Now he got chased right back up into Canaan. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, the south country of Canaan. He and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Well, I think that's new. We didn't know that he took Lot with him. They were all going. Now they're all coming back. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. How did he get rich? Well, the implication is that Pharaoh made him rich. And you have another anticipation, right? Remember, Pharaoh realized that he was being played, that's the word that's used, by God because of Abraham's wife/sister, Sarah. But he figured out, wait a minute, something's up here. What's going on? And through divine intervention or something, he figured it out. He knew, uh-oh, that woman is his wife, and their God is afflicting me. But before he had done that, he had given Abraham a bunch of stuff. And the implication is that he made him rich. So when Abraham leaves Egypt, he leaves Egypt rich. He wasn't already a rich man, and there is indications that they had a lot of stuff. He left Egypt even more enriched. And now you're seeing his situation. He was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev, the south country, as far as Bethel. We'll go look at it in a minute. To the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, spelled Ai. He's right back where he was before. Round trip. To the place of the altar, right back to the same altar that he built, which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. That's interesting. He came down out of Haran. He built an altar. He called on the name of the Lord. He goes to Egypt under questionable motives. He's forced to go back to Canaan. And when he gets back to Canaan, he goes to the same place with the same altar and calls upon the name of the Lord. So he literally ends up right back where he was before. Now Lot, enter Lot. Why do we care? Who went with Abram and had flocks and herds and tents. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling there, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now to add to the tension, the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So you have these disparate people groups that are always at odds with each other over resources and land and so forth. And now that's, in a sense, infiltrated the family of Terah, Abraham's father, because you have Lot, you have Abraham, he's got stuff, and Lot, who is the son of which one of the two? Haran, Abraham's brother. He's got stuff. And so now they're, you need land to, graze all these livestock. So they have a real problem on their hands. This is going to then lead to another tension. So this is what this is what makes me wonder whether Abraham really understood what on earth God was doing. Like I said last week, don't overestimate their insight into the divine plan. Because if you do, then with the events on the ground, you're scratching your head going, well, but he knew this, so why did he do that? My response is, well, are you sure he knew this? We can even do this, like I said before, with the disciples of Jesus and Peter, even in the book of Acts. What did they know and when did they know it? And you can say things like, well, Peter couldn't have known he couldn't have known that the gospel was for the Gentiles as Gentiles and not as proselytes to Judaism. That they would be welcomed in as Gentiles before such and such a time. That time would be Acts chapter 10, full 8 chapters after Pentecost, after the outpouring of the Spirit, and after his unbelievable proclamation of the gospel on that day, which was unwittingly for the nations. He thought he was only giving it to Jews, but it turns out he was giving it for the nations. He didn't have to know that he was giving it for the nation. He didn't have to know, apparently, that the gospel was for the Gentiles until a certain point. And it's that just-in-time God, just-in-time knowledge, just-in-time service, like Meyer with the food, that's in play with God. Just in the nick of time, Abraham knows what he needs to know. Just in the nick of time, God made sure Peter knew what he needed to know. He didn't even tell him. He just finds himself standing on Cornelius's, the Roman centurion's doorstep, wondering why he's there. He literally has no idea. And so he asks him, why am I here? Clearly what he says. For what reason have you summoned me? I think he says. And then he finds out that the guy had a visit from an angel, and that the guy said, go get Peter, this guy named Peter, because Peter's going to tell you a word by which you and your whole household can be saved. Peter then, with no communication from God, goes, oh, now I know, that's in the text. Now I know that God, how does he say it? God is not partial, and that anyone who does right is welcome before him, meaning Gentiles too, something he never thought about before.
It's interesting is that God hasn't stopped doing that. That still happens today with the people that we meet, the people that we see day in and day out. God is still revealing that knowledge to us for that very specific reason.
And sometimes he doesn't even, you don't know it until the event happens.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the event happens and you just do the thing. And then after the event, you go, oh, wait a minute, that was something. That was something right there. I don't know, he does not need your awareness.
That's
He
right.
certainly doesn't need your knowledge. He's never at risk. Oh boy, I hope Gary figures this out, because if he didn't figure this one out, my plan is in jeopardy. I'm gonna be in trouble. Said God never, not one single time. He'll tell you what you need to know. Most of the time, you don't need to know. Most of life is just lived, and things happen. And you look back on it, and you can see the outlines of a plan or something. And maybe it's something about that Romans 8 thing. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. And that's the sovereignty of God, operating on its own without your consent or knowledge, invisibly, through his all-powerful spirit, who's just always there, always doing his thing. And you just have to submit to whatever, even in the ignorance, to whatever it is that he's doing. Okay, that's a little sermon there. I don't know. Anyway, let's keep going. All right, so you got this tension building between Abraham and Lot. And obviously it's going to be a problem. That's the point. Oh, let me look at my notes. What have I got to say here? I'll get back to it. So since I'm on a roll. So Abram said to Lot, boy, yeah, read carefully. Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Very noble. The whole land is before you. That's what he means. Is not the whole land before you? There appears to be an invitation coming to Lot. You see the whole land before you. Implication. You're going to get to choose what land you take, right? There's lots of land, Lot. We don't need to be fighting like this. Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. If to the right, I will go to the left. Well, what on earth is going on here? Because what if he chooses the land of Canaan? The implication is clear. Abraham is willing to leave again. The left and right. I mean, if you're in Bethel, isn't that where they are? The left and right, I mean, I guess it depends on which way they're facing. But the implication is clear. Abraham is offering the land, unwittingly, Abraham is offering the land of promise to Canaan, to Lot. So where is God? You have, again, just like in Egypt, when Abraham left Israel, you have another threat to the promise. So how is this going to be resolved? And that's the rest of the story. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, because that's the next story, or a couple stories out. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. We've talked about eastward before. Eastward is the place where good things don't happen. Westward is when good things start to happen. And so once again, Adam traveled he went east when he was kicked out of the garden. Cain went east. Did the people that left the Babel go east? I don't remember. But here's another person who's going east. West was the good choice, Canaan. So, but anyway, they journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. So Abraham, there it is. There's the great statement, verse 12. That's the important statement right there. Abraham settled. He's no longer a sojourner. He's now settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. He's going, I think, east of the Jordan, out of the land of Canaan. That's the important part. So what you see then is, if you ask, okay, what's the point of the story? Why tell the story? What's the big deal? And among the other things the story might communicate, fundamentally important is another threat. Lot has been a threat to the covenant promise ever since they left Haran, because he's a relative of, he's a grandson of Terah. So there's an inheritance issue going on here. And so he has to go. Somehow he has to go. And the way that he goes is he is very blessed by God, and he is made rich, and then he is moved safely out of the way, so that the promise of the land can remain intact, and Abraham can settle, not sojourn, settle in the land of promise. I think that's what's going on in this text. Okay. Let's stop there for a second. Does anybody want to comment on all that? I kind of.
Disastrous consequences for that decision.
For Sodom? I mean, for Lot?
For Lot.
Yeah. Nothing good ever happened east in the Bible. Well, that's not exactly true. David fled from Absalom when he got overthrown. In 2 Samuel, he fled from Absalom. No. Yeah, 2 Samuel. He went east across the Jordan, where he got refuge in Mahanaim, but not a lot of it.
I think Lot went with good intentions.
Yeah. I think they parted on good terms, yeah.
Because of that promise is through Abraham, not Lot. So God had to separate them to keep that promise that
Yeah.
Abraham.
There is a genealogical element to the promise. I can't see that, can you? Now I gotta fight with the slideshow again. There is a genealogical element to the promise. It's a descendant thing. And so we're going from Seth, the replacement son, when Cain killed Abel for Eve, she got Seth. Then to Noah. Now you can see why the genealogies matter. Then to Shem, one of the sons of Noah. Then to Terah. I don't remember who his father was. Then to Abraham, but he had two other sons, Haran and Nahor. So, the fork isn't complete yet. We haven't completely forked to Abraham until Lot is safely out of the way and disappears. So now it's gone to Abraham officially, and now Abraham is going to have Isaac, and then Isaac is finally it's going to be this competition, this threat to the divine promise. With Jacob and Esau. Oh, actually, we didn't have to go that far. With Abraham, he doesn't want to wait for Isaac. So he's going to say, look, can't you let's just make Eliezer my lead servant, my heir. He's going to do it twice, actually. And God's going to say, no, that's not going to happen. You're going to have a son. And that's the story. The genealogical transfer of the promise of the covenant promise that's coming in 15 to finally the 12 tribes of Israel through Jacob.
This is how salvation happens too. In the fact that God promises these things to us. And these things are set as if in cement that they will happen.
Yeah.
Despite what takes place in the world, despite what takes place to us personally, when God makes a promise, He is a guarantee. He is the one that's going to make it happen. We should never doubt Him.
Yeah, he never pencils anything in. Nothing is ever penciled in with God. He doesn't have a pencil. He's got a knife that he uses to carve his plan into granite. And once it's carved in, and it was carved in from the beginning of the ages, nothing can move that. That's it. So none of us know when the return of Christ is, but it's not penciled in. It's written in granite. Just like our day, our numbered days.
So what you're saying is, even though Abram should not have given Lot that choice, God's plan still.
I'm not saying he shouldn't have. I'm saying it didn't matter. It didn't matter what either one of them did. The threat, there was never really a threat to the promise of the land. God was going to superintend that. You're just seeing how it resolved itself in this case.
So when you said what's going on here, we found out what happened.
Yes. Yeah, and you step back and you just marvel at the plan of God. But you have to notice it because he's not mentioned. Is God mentioned in this whole chapter? Oops, Moto. Robert knows why I was looking for Moto.
Yeah, that's one thought that came to me is,
None.
did Abram think about asking God what to do about that situation, rather than just telling Lot to make a choice?
The answer to your question is no.
You don't get any indication of. I mean, it could just be that it doesn't matter.
Right.
He's not saying anything about Abraham here. He's saying something about the unseen. So he's mentioned 6 times. So he doesn't speak before this point. So this, the only mention of him is when he comes back and he calls upon the name of the Lord, which is a great sign, right? That's a great sign of things. And maybe that's what matters. Things are kind of now back on track for Abraham, and then immediately a good thing happens. The promise is secured. There's an immediate movement into action by God to take care of to settle Abraham in the land. And the way that he settles him in the land is he takes Lot out of the way. And not by killing him, but by blessing him someplace else.
The thing that's interesting too, in the fact that Abram gave Lot the choice. And basically Lot said, he looked over the whole land and said, oh, this got grass. This is that where I can feed my animals with no problem at all. But then he looked the other way and his eyes saw was desert.
Right.
I can't feed my animals on a desert. You know, that's a bad place. So he basically chose what he thought was the best.
And you have to assume that he knew what he was doing.
But God blessed that. If you go down to verse 14 there, God said, okay, he might have chosen what he thought was the best. But this is the best thing because I'm going to bless you and all your animals are going to be fed even though it's desert.
The land of Canaan wasn't blessed because it was very fertile. It was blessed because God was blessing the people there. That's
Herman said that Lot chose by sight from Abraham or Abram. By faith. Because,
maybe.
yeah. You don't agree with that?
No, I'm just saying you have to kind of, it just simply says that Abraham said, let's not fight. You pick whatever you want. But there's no hint in the text that Abraham felt himself divinely inspired, that he had prayed beforehand and knew that Lot would, there's none of that. It just unfolds this way. So,
Do
you know,
we, in our own lives as Christians?
yes,
We need, we need to recognize the promises of God to the extent that we rely upon Him interceding for our cause in any given circumstance.
yeah, he doesn't give you the itinerary.
Yeah.
Who has the itinerary? How many people did a good job of guessing how their life would unfold? No one. No one ever. I mean, look back on your life. Did that go the way you thought it would? I got a degree in, I was civil engineering major. I got a 2.6 in civil engineering. And I could only civil engineering because I couldn't get into any of the other ones, electrical engineering and mechanical, chemical. Then I went in the Navy, so I never used that degree. I hated it. At the time, thinking it's the biggest mistake of my life. Spent 8 years in the Navy. Then, when I got out of the Navy, I joined an organization that I had never heard of when I joined the Navy, Campus Crusade for Christ. Then, when I left Campus Crusade in 2000, I took a position as a help desk guy for IT at a local bank because one of the Bible study leaders of Bible studies that I led was a manager and he hired me. So I worked for one of my students. He hired me. And then within 3 years, I became a software developer. When my first major, I wasn't actually a civil engineering major. I was a computer science major. And I was so bad at it and I hated it so much. I spent only one trimester. Back then, Michigan State was on trimesters, not semesters. I did it for one trimester and switched my major to civil engineering because I said, no way I'm doing this. There's no way I'm going to be a programmer. And then I've been doing that now 21 years. I guess I've been a software developer. So yeah, I had that right.
I said the same thing about going in the military. I'm never gonna go in the military.
Yeah.
And I went in the military because God said, okay, you're gonna tell me no. And
Yeah.
then maybe that's the same with you. You said, I'm not gonna be this. God said, no, this is what you're gonna be.
Look back on your life and marvel at your ignorance of how it would unfold. For the most part, other people, like the Tiger Woodses of the world, he's going to be the world famous golfer, and he knows it from his father knows it from 6 or whatever age. I remember when he first came on the scene, and I mean as like a 10-year-old or something like that. These people like that. Yeah, there are people, but they're known precisely because they're the exceptions. Most people, life does not unfold in a straight line from here to there.
Life is about God. And our job in life is to be okay with whatever He decides to do in our life.
Yeah, he never works in a straight line.
That's right.
And he's a multitasker. So don't assume that, like here, don't assume that everything he's doing for you. He maybe is doing it for somebody else, which is why it's so incomprehensible why that happened. But there's this unbelievable outcome over here that you're never even going to know about.
It's
And you
wonderful.
don't need to know about
It's wonderful to think about what you and Brian are saying. And Brian mentioned we as Christians, and we as a church, we're a group of Christians. And each day, we don't know what the next day is going to bring for our church. We know God's going to intercede. It's all about God and what He wants.
Whether we survive or whether we don't is still in the hands of God and secure in those hands.
It's a great feeling of peace.
Absolutely. That's where the peace comes from.
Well, look at my notes. I need to look at my notes more. Yeah, verse 10, Lot lifted up his eyes, saw all the valley of the Jordan. Eyes and seeing. Very often, that has a negative connotation in the Bible. So he lifted up his eyes in verse 10 there. In chapter 3, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate. Chapter 6, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. So then it figures God sees something different from that 3 verses later. That's what the sons of God saw. This is what God sees. Chapter 6, verse 5. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of men was great on the earth, that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. A reflection on, an estimation, an assessment of God, by God, a divine assessment of what you just read about the sons of God and the daughters of men. Every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Okay, we're almost done here. 10:10. I'm going to finish this whole chapter. I don't know that that's ever happened. Second mention of Sodom. There was a mention in chapter 10. I don't care. I don't know why I wrote that down. Just mentioned. Sodom and Lot now figure in the narrative for a while. But I want to highlight that God plays no part in that story, from a literary standpoint. Abraham calls on the name of the Lord. His presence is now over the text, but he's out of sight as this play, this very important drama unfolds between Abraham and Lot. God is out of the picture, hovering, just out of sight. And with the resolution of it, you can see God's hand all over it, even though he's not first person involved in it in a first person sense, in terms of the literary nature, the literary unfolding of it. Election. You gotta get used to that word. It's a big deal in the Bible. Very controversial to us. It was not controversial to the Israelites. Election, choosing. Electing this over, we just had an election. It's that. It's choosing this one over that one. The difference is we tend to choose based on merit, or the one we think is better, or the one we like, or something like that. The one who dresses better, the one who's better looking. You know, there's presidents in the past that could never have gotten elected today because they would have been seen by the camera today and been seen in a very unflattering light, and they never would have made it. You know, that's just, that's the nature of the camera. But anyway, God doesn't choose that way. He doesn't elect based on merit. He elects for reasons that are he chooses for reasons that are entirely his own. So my summary of this event, Abraham does not settle in Canaan because Lot chose the valley. Lot chose the valley because God gave Canaan to Abraham. All a matter of perspective. Human events unfold in accordance with God's elected purposes, not the other way around. Foreknowledge is not foresight. It's false, strong, in my very strong opinion, that God looked into the future and saw that Lot would choose the other side of the Jordan. And so he was going to give, you know, Abraham the land of Canaan. No. God decreed from time immemorial that Abraham would get the land, and now the events unfold. And so Lot must go by the divine plan of God. And then it becomes just a question of how and when, not if.
Perfect.
Then verse 13, we'll close with this. The men of Sodom were wicked. Here's anticipation, foreshadowing. Were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. So we're kind of back to that Genesis chapter 6 characterization of humans. So now Sodom immediately becomes a synonym for wickedness. The story finishes with Lot in Sodom, lest anyone think we're done with Sodom. The author then immediately says something that's going to be important later. Sodom was exceedingly wicked. Lot chose a very wicked place. Why did he like Sodom? I don't know. Text never says so.
Well, yeah, it does. It says that he looked out. Verse, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan that is well watered, everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar.
Yeah, it doesn't really explain why he seemed to like the city. We will find Lot in a little bit, we will find Lot in Sodom,
Yeah,
not out
okay,
grazing his animals and so forth. He seemed to have a thing for Sodom.
okay. That's where you're at.
But it's all anticipation, and now we're gonna head to Sodom. The question, why does he care about Sodom in the narrative? That's another issue, because there's no threat to the promise from Sodom. It's just this unbelievable story that unfolds where Sodom gets destroyed and Lot gets rescued after he leaves. So he dragged back into the narrative when all this stuff happens in Sodom. So we got to talk about all that. We'll go ahead and close now. It's 10:15. Oh, we didn't finish the chapter. Oh, man. You knew that all along. I was just looking at the end of my paper. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop there.
It's kind of interesting, just looking at some maps. Maps don't show where Sodom and Gomorrah were at.
Lots of speculation. YouTube videos, maybe it's here, maybe it's there. I got my own ideas about it. We'll talk about that. The sulfur balls in that one area. Yeah, it's all really interesting. But, okay, we'll go ahead and shut down. Thanks, everybody. Nate, Naomi, Gabe,
Thank you, Gary.
Stacy.
Thank you, Gary.
Yep.
Thank you, Gary.
All right. Adios.
Adios.
Oh, yeah, you too, Doug.
The only